All right, everybody, welcome back into Cherry Picking. Today's video, we're going to be looking at players not to draft in fantasy hockey. Before we get into those players, as always, the video presented by FanDuel Canada, North America's #1 sportsbook, the best place to be placing NHL futures. I've mentioned a couple of them throughout these fantasy hockey videos as we've gone throughout the offseason. I think the most recent one I mentioned was Victor Olofsson to score 20 or more goals. It's like plus 350. I mentioned he's playing on the first line. There's just great markets like that you can bet on FanDuel for the upcoming NHL season and pretty much any sport. So that link is in the description below to download it. But 6 guys you should not be drafting. I believe 2 goalies, and then the rest forwards. I'll be honest, a lot of these guys are just older and kind of just on their way out of a prominent fantasy hockey role, but still, you got to know who those guys are. So let's get into it. All right, so the first guy on my list is Anze Kopitar on the LA Kings, and honestly, I wouldn't say he's lucky, but like this could have happened last year for Kopitar if you look at his stats and his underlying metrics. So pretty solid year, like 26 goals, 44 assists is very solid for a 36-year-old centerman who's been in the league for like 12, 14 plus years at this point. But I think this is the year he drops off offensively. I mentioned in my last video that they're going away from the 1-3-1, that neutral zone trap. So definitely going to be more offensive production on this LA team this year, I would say. But I think it's going to come from guys like Quentin Byfield, Adrian Kempe, Kevin Fiala, Trevor Moore. Now, Kopitar could be a beneficiary of all that, but I think as a whole, he's not going to be a guy. I think his role has just changed. I think he's definitely a really solid two-way center that's going to help in more of a leadership role for his time here in LA. But he knows that, the torch is kind of being passed to the younger players on this team as this lineup kind of gets flipped over. Same with kind of Drew Doughty. But if you look at last year, he had his lowest shot total of any season where he's played at least 80 plus games with 133 shots on goal. It's really not a lot, especially if you're depending on points in fantasy hockey or you're in a categories league where you need shots. You can't be starting a center who's averaging like 2 shots per game. This is the lowest shot total of any season where he's played at least 80 plus games. 133 shots on goal last year for Anze Kopitar and 26 goals with a shooting percentage of 20%. It's about its highest shooting percentage he's ever had throughout his NHL career. He's always been a guy, or has consistently been a guy, between the 60 and 80 point range. Going into this season, being a 37-year-old center in this day and age of the NHL, super fast, obviously fast-paced hockey game it is now compared to when he first got in the league, like to say. So highest shooting percentage you have he's getting a year older, and then also we've seen his shot total and his ice time continually decrease. This was the first time since his 2014-2015 season where he didn't average at least 20 minutes of ice time per game. So his role offensively will dwindle. I think he's going to have, opportunity elsewhere within this team to flourish, obviously as a leader, as a captain, but offensively, I think this is the year you can leave Kopitar off your draft board. All right, another guy I'm going to be fading this year, not drafting, looking elsewhere, and that's Jamie Benn on the Dallas Stars. Last year, again, a very solid, kind of surprising year. 21 goals, 39 assists on a Dallas Stars offensive lineup that is absolutely loaded with depth. His ice time, though, has consistently declined over the past 4 or 5 years. From 18 minutes, I want to say 4 years ago, down to 15 just last year. He played on a bunch of different lines trying to figure out where he's really going to end up. You have that incredible Hintz line with Robertson and Johnston. You have the Duchesne line, and then you also have the line with Jamie Benn, where he should at this point be playing with 2 of the young bucks in Logan Stankoven and Maverick Bourque, but we'll see kind of where he ends up. But regardless, I think we're seeing the regression portion of Jamie Benn's career here come into fruition. Over the past 2 seasons, he's had a shooting percentage just under 16%, where he scored 54 goals, so still pretty solid numbers. But the 2 seasons before that, he had shooting percentage about 7 and 9%, so you can average that out. Let's call it 8%. His shot total has also continued to decrease, and as his role decreases in this offensive attack, his point total is just going to go down. I think last year, rocking with shooting percentage right around 13%. I think that's a little high, especially considering the year before that he was right at 15%. So I think this is finally the year you see Jamie Benn regress. There'll be much better options at his ADP right now of currently 160 that he can go with other than Jamie Benn. All right, the next guy we're going to be looking to not draft is Vladimir Tarasenko, now in the Detroit Red Wings. Does have that ability to play the left wing and right wing if you're looking at Yahoo fantasy hockey leagues. But last year, and even the year before that, I think you started to see the decline of Vladimir Tarasenko. He's dealt with a ton of injuries. He still has it in some capacity offensively, definitely with his shot, but he's had a hand injury. He's had other injuries over the past 4 seasons that have withheld him from playing a lot. I think he's only played more than 70 games in 2 of his last 5 seasons. Now he heads into a situation in Detroit where I think last year he was probably better off. And last year he still finished 23 goals, 32 assists. So still hit that 50-point plateau. But are we going to see that on Detroit this year? He's getting centered by JT Compher and then also playing alongside Patrick Kane. A 35-year-old Patrick Kane doesn't instill a lot of confidence in me that Vladimir Tarasenko is going to find the scoring ability that he's lost, let's say, over the past couple years, and find it again in Detroit all of a sudden after he lost it pretty much since he's left St. Louis. So daily faceoff has that line combination. But if you look also at last year he played with Stützle and Batherson a lot, played on a lot of different line combinations still, and he wasn't shooting the puck. He averaged almost less than 2 shots per game last season, which is insane considering he was always a guy that had 200 plus shots per season. 155 last year. He also hasn't averaged more than 16 minutes of ice time per game over the last 2 seasons. Over the last 100 games, he hasn't averaged 16 minutes per game on the ice. Less than that, which is insane considering we're talking about Vladimir Tarasenko, a guy who was like considered one of the best goal scorers in the NHL like 3 or 4 years ago. So a guy who's overall age has caught up to him at this point. He's had a lot of injuries. He's been on this is going to be his 4th team in the last year and a half with the Rangers, Ottawa, Florida, and now Detroit. Just not a guy who has enough consistency to really draft in fantasy hockey right now. All right, so a goalie that I've already talked about fading, but I'll reiterate it. I'm not drafting him at all. I'd rather draft his backup at this point, and that's Connor Ingram on Utah. Last year had a fantastic year. 6 shutouts. Pretty sure that was the tied for the league lead in shutouts. He's tied with like 4 other goalies, I believe, with 6. Finished 15th in fantasy points scored amongst goalies. The reason I can't see this happening again, I've got a list of reasons here that I'm going to name off. But the first one is that I still don't think Arizona defensively as a team, they're going to be able to keep him in a role where he's a top 15 fantasy hockey goalie. Like very young offensive lineup. And then I know they've added all these other pieces on defense, but are they really like that good? Utah or Arizona, whichever you want to call it, has ranked in the bottom 5 really in terms of expected goals against, high danger chances allowed, in terms of volume chances allowed as well. They rank in the bottom 5 of all those stat categories. Bringing in Sergachev and John Marino certainly helps, but does it help it to a degree where it's going to, catapult Connor Ingram into getting 20 shots per game instead of 30 or 35? I don't think so. And if you look at Connor Ingram's stats, he was 10th last year in high danger save percentage at 841. That's really solid. But the year before that, he was 32nd at almost below 800. He was also 13th in goals saved above expected last season. The year before that, he was outside the top 20. He also got really hot at the beginning of last year, was one of the best goalies at the beginning of the season. But from February 1st until the end of the season, he was 33rd out of 41 qualified goalies in save percentage at 890 and 37th in goals against at 346. Just goes to show that when you play on a team like Arizona or Utah, and this defensive unit is just, it's not structured or whatever the case may be, it's impossible to continue to play well. Or as well he was playing at the beginning of the season. There's just too much shot volume you have to deal with every single game. There's a lot of variables, obviously, that go into it. So Ingram is a guy that I'm going to be fading this season for sure. And, people are just conveniently forgetting about Karel Vejmelka, who's had stretches of being a fantastic starter for this Arizona team over the past 3 years, let's say. Stretches where he's solely helped them win games. Something Connor Ingram did with him last year, but you saw with Vejmelka, he's never been that consistent because he's always played in Arizona. The same thing will happen with Connor Ingram. Do not get sucked into the trap. Don't draft Connor Ingram this year. All right, the next guy, and this guy I added to my list because looking on the Yahoo Fantasy Hockey ADP list, this guy's getting drafted within the top 120, which means he's going within the top first 12, 11 rounds, and that's Anthony Stolarz on the Toronto Maple Leafs, which it's just puzzling because I get it. A lot of people maybe are skeptical that Wall's not going to be able to handle the full starting goalie load of 50 plus starts, or he's going to get hurt again because he's continued to get hurt. I disagree with that. I also disagree with the fact that Anthony Stolarz is going to be able to play as well as he did last year. Like, Florida's a way better defensive team and has way better talent at D than Toronto does. Sure, you add Tanev and some other pieces that will certainly help, but they're not what Florida put out in their top 6 last year. Like, every single defensive pair they had was very solid, especially defensively, not only offensively, especially defensively. And you look at Stolarz last year, he was the 38th best fantasy hockey goalie, making 24 starts. I don't see him really making more than 30 starts this year unless Wall gets hurt. You can't gamble on a draft pick like that. I don't think it's going to be worth it at all. There's way better goalies you'll be able to take, or maybe not way better, but there's other goalies you'll be able to take at that exact same ADP. And last year, he finished 38th in terms of fantasy hockey points scored amongst goalies, right? 24 starts. He played as good as he could. His goals against was right around 2. I think it actually was below 2. His save percentage was really high. He won a ton of games on Florida. He will win a ton of games on Toronto, but will his stats be as good? I don't think so. And I still have faith that Craig Berube wants Wall to be his Jordan Binnington, which means he's going to get a shit ton of starts. And the last guy that we're not going to be drafting, and this one's kind of obvious, again, a surprise to see his ADP even listed, and that's Nikita Zadorov, now on the Boston Bruins. His ADP is 179. I don't get why this guy's getting drafted at first glance. Like, he's supposed to be this big physical guy, which he is, but in terms of fantasy hockey, he isn't really that guy. Like, if you look at the last 2 seasons, he's ranked outside the top 20 in terms of hits, in terms of defensemen. This is supposed to be a guy who terrorizes other players, but clearly that's not really the case in terms of volume, and he has 40 points to show for it over his last 2 seasons. I would say 70% of the guys who have more hits than him have more points than him too. So why are you limiting yourself to taking this guy at the end of the draft just to fill like maybe one stat category that you're really not even filling? Like last year he had 176 hits. Pretty solid, but I don't think that's really something to write home about when you're only scoring 35 to 40 points. And I don't think it's really going to change on Boston. I think he's still kind of a liability defensively in certain scenarios. There's also so many guys in his current ADP in terms of defensemen that will offer so much more offensively. Like, he gets no power play time. I think he has 1 power play point over the last 2 seasons. He plays on the penalty kill a lot, so if you're in plus minus, it was not always going to help. Swayman, also the contract with him going on. If Korpisalo's starting, that's going to hurt his value on the ice for sure. So I don't really see a role where Zadorov can succeed for Boston here in terms of a successful fantasy hockey defenseman. Lindholm's ADP is like right around his on Yahoo right now. Drysdale's is right there. Orlov's is right there. Ekman Larsson's is right there. I think those are all players I'd rather have than Nikita Zadorov at this point. I think we've seen the plateau of Zadorov. You know, after you get traded 3 or 4 times, I don't know if you'll be able to find a role where he's scoring 50 points, getting the 200 hits that, you know, there's some seasons he did get. So yeah, I'm fading Nikita Zadorov this year. I'm not going to be drafting him. I think there's way more upside in some of the other defensemen you can draft at the exact same time. All right, thank you guys for tuning in. Let me know what you thought of these players to not draft, these players to avoid in your upcoming fantasy hockey drafts. Shout out to FanDuel Canada for sponsoring the video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.